Hello and welcome to the Agtually podcast, where we learn about farming and food from the people who actually grow and process it. I'm your host, Sheridan. Join me as I learn as much as I possibly can about agriculture and food production. Thank you so much for being here. Today we will be learning from Cash Vio, an agronomist who works with Fertizona, which is a local fertilizer company here in Arizona. Cash, thank you so much for being willing to come on and teach me something new today.
Pleasure.
Firstly, tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got started in this line of work.
All right. So I'm a native Arizonan. Been here obviously all my life. Married with two awesome kids. Live in Buckeye. How I got started in agronomy. I went to school for agronomy. I've always been around agriculture. My life. My family isn't directly. My immediate family is not directly in it, but I've been around it all my life through FFA and just agricultural organizations. I went to the University of Arizona, got a degree in agriculture, and then a master's in agriculture education. I actually taught for a year high school, and decided that was not at all what I wanted to do. My wife's a teacher now, so I can say it with a little bit of humor. But wanted something closer to family. Wanted to do something outside, so had the opportunity to look at a couple different jobs in agronomy, and ultimately took one and kind of went through the process to get my CCA license, which is a certified crop advisor license, and pest control advisor license in Arizona, and have been doing it ever since. So.
Okay, very cool. Can you give me like a general idea, or I guess maybe a little more than general, what is agronomy?
Yeah, so agronomy is the scientific part of soil management and crop production. So it's really anything that has to do with crop production, whether that's soil biology, lots to do with pest pressures, nutrient management, obviously herbicides, weed science, and insect science, kind of all rolled up into one in order to help farmers or whoever it is that's growing a marketable crop produce the best possible crop that they can within a certain budget constraint. It's a lot of fun to be able to help them, solve problems on a day-to-day basis, which is why I enjoyed getting into it. Every day is a little different. Every season is a little different. Of course, every farmer is a little different in how they manage their crops. So it's my job to bring them solutions to problems, whether that's budgetary, whether that's obviously soil biology, nutrient management. However I can help them solve a problem.
Okay, very cool. So you were talking about needing some certificates to be an agronomist. Do you have what's the process of becoming an agronomist? Like, can anybody become an agronomist?
Yeah, I guess anybody can become an agronomist. There is there's no I'm not a doctor of anything. There is organizations out there like the Certified Crop Advisor program that you have to prove a certain level of education, post-secondary education and college education with coursework, and then you have to take some extensive testing in order to prove that you actually have the knowledge that goes along with that. The same with the pest control advisor license in Arizona. Not every state has a licensed, say, pest control advisor. Arizona does. You have to take a set of tests, prove your education, and then maintain continuing education classes to make sure that you're obviously staying up with the current technologies or science.
Okay, that makes sense. Can you tell me what a GMO is and how many GMO seeds are on the market?
Yeah. GMO is a little hard. So a genetically modified organism, I'll kind of take a backtrack. Natural selection is what happens in the world, kind of like the fittest survive. So even just for example, a fish that is spawning in fresh water. So it goes from the ocean, a salmon that goes from the ocean to the fresh water to spawn. That's natural selection. Obviously, the fittest that can get through the narrow, shallow areas make it to spawn, and that generation, increases, so the fittest survive. the next step to that is where human intervention comes in, and genetically modified organism is really any crop. So an easy example would be, at some point in history, somebody took a wild apple and said this would be much better if it was bigger and sweeter. So they took, 2 apple trees, cross-pollinated them, made an orchard or several apple trees, picked whichever one was biggest and sweetest, and then continued to breed the apple trees for those traits. That's genetic modification. That didn't happen naturally in nature. Another example would be like roses. Everybody loves roses. Well, 200 years ago, it was a flower, wildflower in Asia, just the same as we would have anywhere. 5 petals. But someone decided to cultivate those to make what we know as roses today. So there's tons of varieties. There's obviously color. They're not 5 petals anymore. There's lots of petals and stem length and shelf life. That was all occurring through genetic modification, but it was generational. Over many generations, it was selected towards that. I think what most people think of as a GMO now is actually called genetic engineering.
Okay.
And how that occurs is it's really similar in the sense that you're breeding for traits, but instead of having it occur over small changes occur over multiple generations of whatever that is, you isolate a gene that has the trait that you want, whether that's disease resistance, whether it's, I would say, drought tolerance, herbicide resistance. You take that gene, isolate it, and insert it into the DNA of a crop or an animal, and then you grow that crop or animal, see if it has that trait, and then that cycle is much shorter. But it may be taking the gene from another. We'll take cotton in this example. It may be taking the gene from another cotton plant that has that trait, or it may be taking that gene from a completely separate species and inserting it into the DNA of cotton, and then ultimately having a BT cotton that is resistant to bollworm. I guess that kind of answers the question. What were the other questions you had?
No, that makes sense. So the other part of that question was how many crops are on the market? Because I know there's only a specific number of seeds that you can buy that are technically labeled a GMO.
Yeah, so I believe there's 13. It started with, in the 90s, tomatoes was the first one, just for some shelf life on tomatoes. It's kind of grown, obviously, since then. Well, the very first GMO was in, I think the 40s, and it was a GMO for human insulin for diabetes. So that was actually the first GMO.
Interesting.
For that human use, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So tomatoes, then potatoes and squash, papayas. It's definitely not a lot. It's 13. And then it's kind of, the last decade or so, has progressed into salmon. There is beef and also pork, but those aren't widely marketed. But
okay. Interesting. So last night I was drinking a carbonated drink, and it was just water and lemon, and it had non-GMO certified on it. Is that mislabeling a product because it's just water and lemon?
Right. It's tough because marketing is such a separate thing from science.
Okay.
And I think that's where a lot of the confusion stems from as far as GMOs go. Just because you're right, there's not a GMO, a genetically modified. Well, first of all, we kind of discussed what is a GMO versus what is genetically engineered.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, so in that sense, it could be false marketing, because it is, lemons have been genetically modified in the most basic sense to produce sour lemons or higher yielding lemons to whatever degree. They're not genetically engineered, but I think it's just it's a marketing difference, and I wouldn't call it necessarily false advertising. But it is misleading for the consumer, which there are a lot of things like that out there. So yeah, to say GMO free, well, you obviously know then, I guess you could say that it doesn't include, corn syrup. It could say corn syrup free would be the same thing as non-GMO. So corn is a GMO.
Yeah.
For the most part, especially corn syrup and grain corn.
Yeah. So why are people so afraid of the term GMO, do you think?
I think it's been proven safe. The FDA, the EPA, the World Health Organization, all of these organizations that are scientifically based, peer-reviewed literature says there's no additional risk for a GMO against conventional non-GMO crop. It's made in a lab, which I think can confuse people or cause people some anxiety. I think there's a lot of marketing behind it. What I think a lot of people don't understand is the fact that we, or not me and you, but you put a GMO into a crop in order to reduce a pesticide or insecticide or herbicide or create a longer shelf life for a product. And that ultimately reduces the use of pesticides, whether that's insecticide, herbicide, fungicide, any of those things. It's all in an effort to decrease that usage of what is also termed by society as bad. So it's a 500% decrease in corn insecticide or something like that since the introduction of GMO corn. Okay. So I guess both sides of the story don't always get told. Absolutely, research needs to be done and has been done to confirm that it's safe, and it's just the overwhelming body of evidence says that it is, and and I think obviously continued future studies, long-term studies are important in that area, but really there's no reason to say they're not safe at this point.
Okay, you mentioned the decreased use of pesticides and herbicides, and that was something that came to my attention, was that people are afraid of a GMO because they think, it's herbicide or pesticide resistant, so then they can spray it for bugs. Right. And then it has all this pesticide on it, and then I'm eating that pesticide. Right. But that's not the case?
No, when it's genetically modified, it's a gene expression or a change. So it's actually a lot less insecticide, pesticide just in general, whether that's a herbicide tolerance that the plant has, so we can spray a specific type of herbicide rather than 3 different ones, and all of which have been deemed safe, through the EPA and residues and a lot of science that goes behind anything to register any type of pesticide. But in general, it just makes it a lot easier and part of this is economics. It makes it easier in one sense for the farmer, but it also makes it more economical to have one insecticide or one herbicide if they need any at all. Okay. An example of corn, for the insecticide, a BT gene was inserted, into corn and cotton, and so that pest is no longer a pest in that crop. So there's zero spray if that crop has that trait. So in that sense, you have zero application of pesticide in that crop. I think by doing that from another organism, I think there's the science needs to continue to make sure that there's no downstream effects of that. But it's been done, and there's no ill effects of these traits being ingested for human consumption for any reason. So.
Interesting. I want to move on to talking about chemical fertilizers. First, can you give me a definition for what a chemical fertilizer would be?
Yeah, it'd just be anything manufactured, to make nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, or a minor nutrient. Okay. Crops use the bulk macronutrients are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and then minor nutrients also. Anything manufactured would be considered a commercial fertilizer.
Okay. And then, do they contaminate groundwater or negatively affect the soil?
They can if they're abused. I see this. I obviously see this in the news a lot. How nitrogen can pollute groundwater, and I think there's definitely instances of that. But overall, what people should know is that there's reasons that. So fertilizer is an expensive input for crops. Farmers buy fertilizer to help grow a yield to feed our world. They need that nutrient to grow the yield required to feed the world. Because it's a huge expense, farmers aren't out there just over applying fertilizers because just simply it's an economics reason. They're not going to overspend on that fertilizer. 30 years ago, maybe when less was known about, we know specifically today what a corn plant is going to use in terms of nitrogen. So we put on that amount, and we've had huge technological advances to make sure that product is through other means is not just a nitrogen molecule, but you add in a stabilizer to ensure that it's stays within the root zone of the plant to be taken up when the plant needs it, rather than just leached out through the soil via irrigation water or rain.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, with abuse, it absolutely can be a scenario, but because of the economics, farmers don't want to spend a bunch of extra money on fertilizer that's not needed. Mm-hmm. Advances in technology that create the ability to essentially prescription apply what a crop needs, rather than just blindly throwing nutrients out there and wasting money and obviously potential environmental impacts are just not widely done,
Okay.
for that reason.
Yeah, I also I was thinking. So my husband Ty, he used to apply the fertilizers and pesticides
Right.
and herbicides. That was his job a few years ago. But he would have to go and get a certificate. He'd every couple years he'd have to do a test again.
An applicator license.
Yeah, he'd have to get his license renewed in order to do that. And I think that's something else that people aren't aware of, that you have to know a certain amount about
Right.
it in order to be allowed to apply these things. We're not just doing it willy-nilly, right?
Yeah, no, the education piece in agriculture, especially in the West, where a lot of this gets publicity, and rightly so. I mean, we can't be close to the ocean. We're anywhere close to waterways. The amount of education that's taken place is huge, and the technology that's been able to come from just the education piece and the science that's come out. That's kind of where the agronomist comes into play. That's my job to take what's been found in science and literature and laboratories and disseminate that down to the farm level and figure out, okay, is this something that fits? Is it not? Is it, the economics have to make sense, but what environmentally also makes sense to not over apply this. So yeah, education is a huge piece of it. And it's not, farmers are not, no longer the overall straw hat wearing, people. They're businessmen and women. And they might still wear overalls and straw hats, but they're much smarter than they have much larger access to information than they ever have in the past. And I think universities and extension agents are getting so much better to take. We don't have this body of science and literature and data that's kind of for other university aspects. I think they're doing a really good job at getting that information into the hands of growers and producers to actually impact the field level, and then there's a dialogue there that goes back and forth that I don't think has happened a lot in the past, and there's a lot of good that comes from that, just because it's easy to translate down to the farm level and make actionable changes, and also farmers can say, hey, that's not what we're seeing here. Maybe more research needs to be done in this area, whether that's insect thresholds or fertilizer uses or whatever the case may be. There's that dialogue that's happening more and more, I think, and that's important.
Yeah, it's not like how Grandpa used to do it, but
Right.
That's not a bad thing.
No, and I think the way Grandpa used to do it was the best way he knew how. I think we look back on that and think that was dumb or illiterate, and that's not at all the case. They were doing the best thing they knew at the time, and that you could take anything that grows over time, modern medicine, what we do today is not what we did 20 years ago, because we grow and learn, and that seems dumb back then, but it was not dumb at that point in time. And, I'm sure 30 years from now, we'll think what we're doing now was dumb, but it's the best thing we know to do at the time with the information we have. But so that doesn't take away from the science and research that's being done for the future. But we don't need to hammer ourselves on, as long as we're taking that information that we know and applying it. And I think the United States is so good at that. You have so many third world countries that they're just trying to survive. They're just trying to feed their people. Here we have the choice whether organic, non-organic, 15 different choices in apples at the store. We have that luxury, and I think it's a good thing. We push the boundaries of what's the best management practices because of that, because we have that blessing.
For sure. So I've heard from multiple sources that farmers do not implement crop rotation. Can you explain what crop rotation is, and then if it's a common practice among farmers?
Yeah, so again, kind of back to that 20 years ago, 30, 40 years ago, before we maybe knew differently, corn, for example, grew really well in this area, so we grow corn every year. Now we know that's not the best thing for the soil, and that's not widely practiced anymore. The reason it's not widely practiced is because of factors like soil erosion, but also if you take a crop, a lettuce crop, for example, or a potato crop, and you grow that crop year after year after year after year, what you'll find is you're decreasing the diversity in the soil, just because there's certain bacteria that thrive in a potato environment, for example. So you're suppressing all the other bacteria and increasing that potato thriving bacteria. So crop rotation is the opposite of that. It's taking a potato crop one year on a piece of land, and the next year rotating it out to something like corn or even another produce crop, and doing that from year to year, so you don't have the same consecutive crop grown. That's crop rotation, and there's a lot of value for the farm to do that. It just specifically because you're increasing the biodiversity of the soil. You're making sure that there's not a huge amount of say a weed that grows in potatoes prevalently that you can't really control. You're not doing that year after year and compounding that problem. You rotate it out to another crop where you maybe can control that weed. And then certain crops take certain nutrients. Corn uses a lot of nitrogen out of the soil. Well, you can put in a crop like alfalfa that actually adds nitrogen to the soil when you rotate that around. So then the next time you put corn back in that field, it's a fantastic crop for no other reason than it's been rotated out to something else. So it's a widely adopted farming practice nowadays. And so I mean, it's 40 years ago, maybe not the same, okay. But as we grow and learn, we realize that, and they did 40 years ago, they knew for whatever reason, the 5th year of corn in this field, my yields are going down, just because the crop didn't have everything it needed. They didn't have that biodiversity to thrive. So they knew this, but didn't know the exact method or what to do around it. And so I think there's instances where markets dictate what goes into that field, and it may be corn 2 years in a row, but it's not, I would say all farmers know now that that's not something that should be a regular practice, okay. And they know the reasons why.
Yeah, so you're saying that with crop rotation, we reduce the use of things like fertilizer mm-hmm. and herbicides, things
right.
like that.
Yeah, you absolutely decrease the use. You can add organic matter to the soil that way. Water holding capacity of the soil, which is just a fancy way to say it doesn't dry out so fast. And then the biggest is, and we don't know a lot about this aspect of it, and we're continuing to learn more, but is the the biology of the soil. There's so much that we don't know about the soil. So we know it works to rotate it, but we don't know exactly why, what mechanisms make that work. And there's a lot of research going into that now. And as we learn more about that obviously that field's going to change a lot.
Interesting. You keep saying research, and in the last interview I did, she was talking about research a lot too. And I just love that farmers are just really involved in research, and they're wanting to learn more about their farm animals and their crops and stuff like that. And I really think that's something that people don't think of when they think of a farmer.
Yeah, I think, again, back to that coveralls and straw hat.
Right.
Farmers have lived through they've reaped the benefits of that research, and so has the world with, the amount of food that a farmer can produce with less. They're constantly faced with economics, less land, less use of fertilizer, less labor. I mean, we go on and on, but because of the changes and advancements in research and technology, they've seen that a tractor can do so much more than it did before on much less diesel, and we don't say enough, reducing the carbon footprint of agriculture has been a thing for a very long time. It's not something new, and as the world adopts these token phrases, it's what farmers have done for really generations, it seems like. So it's always been done, and because I think generations of farmers have seen the benefits of the advances in research and technology, they're quick to adopt. And I think, not needless adoption or like willy-nilly adoption of something, but if it's proven and we can replicate it and scale it on the farm, then it's done very rapidly. And GMOs are a great example of that. They saw the value in the decreased pesticide use and increased yield, and it's adopted fast.
Yeah. Do organic farmers use agronomists?
Yeah, absolutely.
How would they use an agronomist?
Yeah, so organic farmers aren't really different than conventional farmers in the fact that they're providing a crop to be consumed, however that is, whatever crop may be, and they have the same problems that a conventional farmer does with the soil and the crop production. So they use an agronomist the same to identify and help solve problems in relation to the soil biology or the soil makeup, as well as the crop production. They're not immune from pests. They still have weeds. They still have bugs. They still have soil-borne diseases. So they absolutely use an agronomist.
Most of the time, pesticides and fertilizers are applied by spraying. If an organic farmer uses an agronomist, do they also use the sprays on their crops? Yeah. So
same. Nobody. Whether you buy an organic salad or a conventional salad, you do not want any bugs in that salad, right? So and they're not, in a sealed greenhouse. They're not, some organic crops may be, some conventional crops are too. Organic crops are grown a lot in fields, so they still have the same pests. They have the weeds, they have the bugs. They still have to manage those. The difference would be, so they are spraying and they are, dealing with weeds. They must use organic board, a National Organic Board certified pesticides. It's a different class of pesticides, some of which are actually used in conventional agriculture. So they have, I guess what I'm saying is they have a smaller toolbox of what they can apply on that field.
Okay.
Because they have that smaller toolbox, they have to, generally the costs are increased, and the start over. That's okay. So they have a much smaller toolbox. Their costs are usually increased for that reason, and generally it may not be as effective as a conventional spray, whatever that may be for. But the science behind conventional versus organic is proven. There is no more additional risk by eating conventional than an organic crop. They're still nutritionally valuable, the same. And I think what I would hope that people do is it's a market choice. If you want to eat organic, you can eat organic, but don't fall victim to just because I want to. I feel like it's more healthy for me because the science says that it's no different. It's no higher or lower risk. And I think there's one-off studies, but replicated data to say it's safer is just not out there. So become educated on what you're choosing to buy, and don't rely on $1 billion marketing arm to determine I need to eat organic or conventional because of these reasons. Sometimes you hear like, well, I don't want worms in my salad, so I'm not going to eat organic. Well, that's not going to be the case, right?
Yeah.
There's not going to be worms in your organic salad, and the same can be said for this organic salad is healthier. That's just not proven. What is proven is the fact that eating vegetables and fruits is actually really beneficial for you, whether they're conventional or organic. And I think that's what gets frustrating is when you have say a household budget for food, and somebody thinks that I have to have an organic vegetable or fruit because that's my only healthy option, when the EPA, the World Health Organization, the USDA have all done mounds of research to say it's no different and safe. I'm not saying we blindly trust that, but we look at the pile of data rather than a study and say, okay, well, I'm not going to forego all vegetables and fruits because I can't afford the organic option, because I think if I love my family, or if I believe in in protecting myself in the future, that I can't buy a conventional product. That's just not the case. There's no data to say that. And so I think become a good consumer and don't be a victim to marketing of any kind. Do your own research. It's not that hard. You gotta look at actual peer-reviewed data. But and the other thing is, marketing is one thing, but then TikTok and Instagram marketing is a complete other. So don't get your scientific information from Instagram or TikTok or a podcast even, right?
Yeah.
You need to become a researcher. If it's something that you feel passionately about, research it. And I think you'll find that there's no difference. And we're feeding people, not we, but agriculture is feeding people a growing population. And in order to keep up with that, organics as a whole for everybody is not sustainable. It's the same as a Ford and a Chevy. If everybody drove a Ford would have a hard time keeping up with that demand. And a car is a car in that sense. So
yeah.
I think that's a good way to look at it, and just be a good consumer.
I've heard that in wanting to eat healthier, like, you don't be worried about the organic versus conventional stuff. What you want to do is find a product that has gone through fewer processes, right? Like, eat an apple, not an apple, breakfast bar.
Right, that has 10 different preservatives on it or whatever.
Exactly, yeah. Just go for an apple, and it's okay if it's not organic.
Right.
But if it's organic, that's okay too.
Right.
But just pick something that's fresher.
Yeah.
And then you're on the right track.
And that's 100%. You look at again, back to the data and research, I guess, but there's huge mounds of information that says, eating leafy greens and high fiber vegetables is absolutely beneficial for you. Same with, just look for that information. If you're interested in longevity and health, then look for piles of information, not one study, and then also not TikTok and Instagram and whatever else you think makes sense. And just because it's more expensive does not mean it's any different or better.
Right. Yeah, I think that's also very true. People tend to think if it's more expensive, it's better for me.
Right, and organic costs are higher. The labor's higher. The fertilizer costs are higher, but it's absolutely the same in terms of what they do for farming practices. There's a lot of organic farms that are conventional farms as well. So they saw a market need, a market want. Somebody wanted a Maserati and not a Ford, so they make a Maserati. They make the Ford also. They make the conventional and they make the organic on the same farm. Different fields, of course. That's how organics works. You have a certified field for organics, but yeah.
Yeah, interesting. I've heard that with dairy too. You have an organic herd and a conventional herd, and when your organic herd, if a cow in there gets sick or something, and you can't just let your cow be sick, right? You have to treat her. So when you treat her, then you move her over to the conventional obviously after the withdrawal period and whatever's out of her system, but she's no longer technically organic. So then she's just moved into the conventional field.
Yep.
So my dad likes to say that farmers were the original environmentalists or ecologists. Do you agree with this?
Yeah, I totally agree with it. We've talked a lot about the changes that farmers have adopted over time, and farmers aren't growing a business to sell at the end of their life or for retirement. Like many farmers I know do not retire, but they have a long-term view of it. They don't have a one crop season to another. They're trying to protect their business, their land, their soil, their crops for generations, really. I mean, most farmers think about their grandchildren in the sense of them farming on the same ground that they're currently taking care of. So if you want to be an ecologist, you got to look at the big picture, and farmers absolutely do that. I mean, there's so much that goes into looking out for the future that that plays a role into what choices we make today. And I mean, I think that's ecology, looking at the implications of what you're doing and how it affects the environment that you're in. And farmers do that, fantastically well. There's always exceptions to everything, but they're really focused on that, and that's a passion. Farmers are passionate. They're not going to be a construction company that builds a skyscraper and 10 years from now tear it down and build a better skyscraper. You can't do that with ground, with soil. You've got to build it over time, and you herd it over time, and you got to make those choices to be constantly better. And that comes at a cost a lot of times for the farmer to make those choices and sacrifices, but they understand the beneficial aspects of doing that. And I mean, that is an ecologist. So
it's investing for the future.
Yeah, and really that it's much different than a lot of other things, just because you can't start over. And they know that. You can't just magically make this soil better after you've depleted it for 20 years. It takes time and active choices and crop rotation. And one thing we didn't, I don't think we really talked about was tillage. That's one thing that I've seen in the past 15 years that has become much more adopted is, we don't deep till crops as much as we used to. What that means is we don't run huge big tractors over the field to turn over soil and put in a new crop. We rotate crops, and we just do the tillage in a much more precise manner that conserves the organic matter in the soil, the biology in the soil, the water capacity of the soil, how much water the crop takes. So all of these adoptions have played a huge role into the ecology of the farm. And
so low till would be like just disrupting the earth's surface as little as possible.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah, and the benefits of it are, like I said, organic matter and break down nutrients to use for the next crop. So the economic value for the farmer is obviously better soil biology, so higher yields, but also less fertilizer use, less water use, and reducing the carbon footprint. You're not sending 3 tractors out to do a field, you're sending 1, and in a lot of cases that same planter is doing a dirt work to a very 3-inch wide piece of area and planting at the same time. So a 1 pass across the field in order to get a crop up, which 40 years ago might have taken a plow, a disc, maybe twice on a disc, a ripper. So that's happening a lot less, and farmers have adopted that very widely. They see the benefits in the crop and obviously the economics and labor aspect of it as well.
Does that go hand in hand with crop rotation? Because if you're not planting the same thing over and over, you don't have to dig as deep to get to that nutrient.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. I think it does go hand in hand.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I guess this is kind of something we talked about just now, but is it true that there's widespread soil erosion due to farming?
Yeah. So I think, we did talk about it. The past 40 years ago, when the best thing to do was turn that soil over and disc and rip and not compact. All those changes have come along with equipment where we don't have to anymore. So erosion of the soil is always a possibility. We're farming. It's not a prairie land anymore. But I would say, in Arizona at least, we have more organic matter in the farms than is ever, 50, 60 years ago. That same ground that's now a farm was a desert, an arid desert that had minimal organic matter. We're seeing much higher levels of organic matter in those areas. And, there's parts of the country where that's maybe not the case, prairie lands that are being farmed. But I think as a trend, that's getting much better. So I've seen all the science that says, we've decimated organic matter and caused erosion of soils. And there's obviously examples of that in history, but I think the trend is not that at all. Building organic matter, building just irrigation practices and planting cover crops on field edges, which they do a ton of in the Midwest, to where if they get a 5-inch rain, that topsoil is not going anywhere. They're just keeping it on the farm. Again, back to the ecology of it, a farmer invests a lot into their soil. So if they don't want it to erode and go into the river or wherever it may be, they want to keep it there.
Makes
so
sense.
They're going to implement practices to make sure that's the case.
Yeah, my sister mentioned that we learned a lot after the Dust Bowl in the 30s, I guess late 20s, early 30s, when we lost so much topsoil because we just didn't know how to care for it.
Right.
So since then, we've learned a lot, haven't we?
Yes, yeah, tons, and that's so that obviously that had implications, and those implications have taken decades to remedy. But the process is in place, and we know why it happened, and we can identify ways to stop it from occurring and actually reverse that process. And farmers are all about it.
Yeah, for sure. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you'd like to touch on?
No, I think just in general, just the two sides to every story, and just being a good consumer. I think podcasts like this are great to talk about the other side of the story, I guess, or just an unbiased side of the story. And I think I would encourage everybody to be a good consumer in the choices that they make, and do your own research. Don't trust just anything that you hear.
Right. Where can people go to do this kind of research?
Yeah, so Google is a good tool. You just Google Scholar. Basically anything peer reviewed or duplicated, published in a good magazine or good science journal is valuable.
So not just like some person's blog or some like advocacy website. Like you want to find real articles, real research. And
I'm a consumer, obviously, so it's what drives your passion. What do you want to know more about? And dive deeper and fact check whoever. This podcast, the Dirty Dozen food that was so popular, I think 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, it's still pretty popular among like young moms like my age. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I think diving into that and seeing what a pesticide residue is and how crops have to be tested through the EPA for that. Like, learn that process, because I think what you'll find is we have such a huge safe food supply here, and there's processes in place to make sure that that's the case. Now, I'm again not saying that there's not things that could be improved on or researched more, but there's a lot of value in the U.S. and what our food supply is. So, so I guess being a good consumer through just research and not trusting a blog or what somebody's qualifications for stating something and what, journal article or what are they referencing? Because you hear things all the time that are just stated so matter-of-factly that people believe them, and there's maybe even zero merit to what they're saying. And I think that going towards a body of evidence that suggests things or scientifically proves things, that's where we ought to spend our time going as consumers, and trusting sites that actually go out of their way to do that unbiasedly.
Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me today. I learned so much. I knew I was going to learn a lot, but I learned more than I thought I would. So thank you so much.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on this journey as I learned what it actually takes to grow and process our food. I hope you learned something new and interesting in today's episode. If there is a process that you'd like to know more about or any questions that you may have, please leave them in the comments. Next time you eat something, remember to thank God and thank a farmer.